At 20, Lena Voss had $41, a duffel bag in the back of a car she slept in, and nobody in the world who knew where she was. She'd aged out of foster care at 18 and had worked 2 jobs for 2 years to stay housed, cleaning a manufacturing plant on the night shift and waitressing at a diner on mornings, until the plant contracted out its cleaning to an agency that paid $3 less an hour, and the diner closed on a Tuesday with a handwritten note on the door. She drove south with what she had. When the county tax auction in Carville, Tennessee listed a condemned jailhouse on the edge of town, assessed at $30, starting bid 9, no reserve, she raised her hand. Nobody else did. For $9, Lena owned a building. But 6 weeks later, when she finally worked the old key into the lock of the warden's cell door at the back of the building, the last room she hadn't opened, she found something Warden August Pelham had kept there for 31 years. Something no one in Carville knew existed, sealed behind a panel in the wardrobe of a man who had spent his entire career deciding what justice actually looked like in a town too small for a courthouse. Lena's life had been divided by a series of thresholds. The moment the social worker came, the moment a new family's door opened, the moment a school year ended and the placement changed. She had learned early that homes were temporary structures and that the only things worth keeping were things that fit in a bag, and she had organized her life accordingly. A library card, a spare pair of work boots. The photograph she kept in the pocket of her jacket, a woman with short hair and a wide, warm face, squinting into the sun in someone's backyard, laughing at something just off frame. Carol Voss. The one placement that had felt like a place rather than a pause. She had gone to Carol at 6 years old and stayed until Carol died of a cardiac event at 48, when Lena was 15. After that, there had been 3 more placements, none of them bad, none of them Carol. She aged out at 18 with $200 and a list of resource programs from her caseworker that she had read carefully and worked through systematically, because that was what you did. She got the plant job first. The manufacturing plant ran a night shift and paid $12 an hour to clean the production floor and the bathrooms and the break room, and Lena worked it 5 nights a week and was good at it in the way she was good at anything that required attention and patience. Then the diner mornings, a cash-only place on a state highway with a counter and 8 tables and a cook who came in at 5 and left before noon. And Lena worked the counter and the register and carried the plates and was good at that too, because she was good at reading people and knowing what they needed before they said it, which she attributed to years of reading rooms before entering them. For nearly 2 years it worked. Not comfortably, never comfortably, but it worked. She paid rent on time and bought groceries carefully and kept the car registered and the insurance current, and maintained the running balance of a life that was barely viable but was hers, assembled from what she could find, and she was not going to let it fail if she could help it. The plant contracted its cleaning to a regional agency in March. The agency offered her a position at $9 an hour. The math stopped working. The diner's owner called her on a Tuesday to say he was closing at the end of the month. A chain breakfast place was coming to the highway, and he'd been watching his traffic numbers for a year and had decided to get out before the numbers made the decision for him. He was sorry, he said. He meant it. 2 weeks later, both jobs were gone. She gave up the apartment after 1 missed rent month because she could see the math clearly. She had maybe 40 days before the situation became unresolvable, and if she spent 40 days pretending it wasn't happening, she would lose the car too, and losing the car meant losing everything. She moved into the car on a Thursday. She kept it clean. She kept her routine. Library for the Wi-Fi, the YMCA for the shower, day labor when she could find it. She was 20 years old and she had been here before, not in this exact form, but in the essential shape of it, the situation that didn't have a solution yet but would if she kept looking. She drove south because the cost of living was lower in the foothills counties and she had heard construction work was available. She had been in Carville for 11 minutes, filling a tank she'd nursed 300 miles when she saw the auction notice. She read it 3 times. She did the math. She went to the auction. The Carville County Courthouse was a 2-story brick building on the main square that had a Tennessee flag and an American flag side by side above the entrance, and a row of Bradford pear trees turning red along the sidewalk. The auction was on the front steps at 9 on a Wednesday morning. A dozen people, an auctioneer with a clipboard. The crowd had the particular distracted attention of people who have already identified what they want and are waiting for it to come up. Parcel 92B came up near the end. Former jailhouse. Condemned. $9. Someone made a quiet comment. The auctioneer looked at the crowd. Lena raised her hand. She was 20 years old and she had $32 after the bid and a car with 3/4 of a tank and a duffel bag with 2 days of clean clothes. She was also, as of the gavel, a property owner. The clerk at the folding table took her $9 without expression and handed her the deed receipt and the county map. She drove to the address. The sourwood trees along Prater Lane were going deep red, early color, the Tennessee hills catching October fast, and the jailhouse sat back behind them with its limestone walls and its barred windows and its flat roof and its faded sign like something that had been waiting to be found for exactly as long as it had been standing there. Carvel was the kind of town that had once been something, a mill town, a stopover, the kind of place that had a main street and a hardware store and a sense of itself, and was now in the long, quiet process of becoming something smaller. The jailhouse was on Prater Lane, a block off the main road, set back behind a stand of sourwood trees that were going red and orange in the late September heat. The building was limestone, 1 story, with a flat roof that had buckled in one corner and a front door with a padlock that the county clerk had told her the key for was in the deed packet. It was smaller than she expected. 640 square feet sounded like a building and looked like a room. The bars on the 2-cell windows were original, cast iron, set in the limestone, going orange with rust but solid. The front wall had a painted sign that had faded to a ghost of letters, CARVELL Constable's Office. Underneath, in smaller letters still visible if you stood at the right angle, APLLHAM, Warden. Lena stood in front of it with the key in her hand. She had $9 of equity. She had 41 minus 9, so $32. She had a car with 3/4 of a tank. She had a duffel bag with 2 days of clean clothes and the photograph in her jacket pocket, and a sense that she was at the bottom of something that was either a hole or a foundation, and she was going to find out which. She unlocked the door. Inside, 2 cells side by side, their barred doors standing open, the interior stone walls bare and dark with moisture. Between the cells and the entrance, a narrow passage with a wooden desk bolted to the wall, its surface scarred with decades of paperwork. A pegboard above the desk, empty except for 2 hooks, one of which still held a ring of keys, old skeleton keys on a steel ring, the kind made to last. At the back of the building, separated from the cell block by a solid wooden door with its own lock, a single room that the county paperwork called Warden's Quarters. The air inside was cool and old, the way stone buildings hold their cool even in September heat, and it smelled of dust and damp limestone and the faint specific ghost of disinfectant applied decades ago, and since then only the passage of time. Not unpleasant. Old. Permanent. That door had a different lock. Older. The key on the ring didn't fit it. Lena tried each key systematically. None of them worked. She looked at the door, heavy, solid pine, hung on iron strap hinges that had been set into the stone, and then at the ring of keys, and then she set both down on the desk and went to look at the rest of the building. The cell block floor was flagstone, the same blue-gray limestone as the walls. The cells were maybe 6 by 8 feet each, with a low cot frame bolted to the wall in the first and a bucket still in the corner of the second. The walls were solid. She knocked on them. Nothing moved. The limestone was 12 inches thick and had been set in the same lime mortar the builders had used in the 1920s, and it had held. The leaking corner of the roof was visible from inside, a dark stain spreading across the ceiling stones where water had worked its way under the buckled flat roofing material. Not catastrophic. Not yet. She went back to the desk. On the surface of the desk, half hidden under the dust of years, was a folded piece of paper. She lifted it. It was a note typed on county letterhead dated 4 years ago. To whoever acquires this property, the warden's room at the rear has a separate lock. The key is not on the ring. Look for it where Gus always left things he wanted found, the back hook on the inside of cell 1. Crisp. Lena read it twice. She went to cell 1. The barred door was standing open. She looked at the inner wall. No hook was visible. She ran her hands along the wall surface, the rough limestone, until she felt it, a small iron hook, set into the mortar between two stones at shoulder height, invisible in the shadow unless you were looking. On the hook, a single key, old brass worn smooth with handling. She didn't know how long it had been hanging there, but the hook was set so that the key hung inside the shadow of the cell door when it was open, invisible unless you pushed the door almost closed. Gus Pelham had hidden a key in a jail cell. She almost smiled at that. She took it to the warden's room door. The lock turned on the second try, a little stiff with age, but the key found the mechanism and the tumblers moved. She pushed the door. The warden's room was 12 feet by 12, larger than the cells but still small by any other measure. A narrow bed frame, iron, no mattress. A table with 2 chairs, solid pine, the kind of furniture built to outlast the people who used it. A wood stove in the corner with a rusted flue pipe. A single window with bars, looking out at the overgrown lot behind the building, the sourwood and pokeweed gone high and thick against the back wall. And against the far wall, a wardrobe, tall, heavy, built-in, its doors standing open to show a rod with no clothes and a set of empty shelves. On the table, as if set there this morning, a tin cup, dented enamel, the kind used by every work crew and fishing camp in the state for 50 years. Beside it, a pocket Bible with a cracked spine, its cover worn smooth and dark at the corners. And leaning against the Bible, a photograph in a plain wooden frame, a man in a constable's uniform, broad-shouldered, standing in front of this building with his hands at his sides, and his face squinting into the sun in the patient, resigned way of someone who doesn't like being photographed, but understands the occasion calls for it. He had a kind face. The kind that comes from practice, not disposition. 3 objects on a table in a room that nobody had opened in years, left there deliberately, left where they would be found. Lena set the key on the table. She looked at the wardrobe. The back panel of the wardrobe was not flush. It was close enough that you'd miss it if you weren't looking, but the seam ran straight in a way that wood doesn't run straight after 40 years of Tennessee humidity. She pressed it. Gave. She pressed harder at the corner and it shifted. The panel came free. Behind it, a shelf, narrow, deep, and on the shelf, set there with the same deliberateness as the cup and the Bible and the photograph, a leather ledger, dark green, thick, its cover worn smooth at the spine, a metal document box with a hinged latch, and wrapped in a piece of chamois cloth, a handwritten envelope with a single name on the front, for whoever this finds. She didn't open the envelope that night. She sat in the warden's room with the ledger in her lap and the tin cup on the table and the last of the afternoon light coming through the barred window, and she read. The first entry was dated March 1963. First month on the job. Town of Carville Constable, Harn County. Pop, 1,400. 2 cells, no deputy, no radio. If something goes wrong on the far side of the county, it's going to be a while. Mayor Briggs says the job is mostly paperwork. I expect he's right. We'll see. She turned pages. The early entries were brief trespass complaints, domestic disturbances resolved without charges, the occasional drunk in the street. Gus Pelham had a plain style, short sentences, the facts, and then a note at the end about what he actually did, which was often different from what the official record showed. June 1963. Brought in Bobby Clem for drunk and disorderly. Bobby is 16 and his father has been gone since January. Let him sleep it off and drove him home in the morning. Didn't file, told him next time I'd have to, he won't come back. November 1965. Harmon Jeffries got into it with his neighbor over a fence line again. Neither one will budge. Went out and helped them move the fence to where the original survey said it was. Took 2 hours and a level. Filed nothing. Problem solved. She kept reading. The pattern was consistent and unremarkable in the way that years of quiet competence were unremarkable. A man doing his job in a town that needed someone to do it, using his judgment about what the job actually required. He noted what he filed and what he didn't. He noted when he drove someone to the hospital and when he talked a family down from something that might have become a charge. He noted the bail money he put up small amounts, $20, 40, sometimes more, and marked each one with a single notation. PD/not PD. Paid or not paid. Far more were not paid than were. The second volume started in the mid-1970s and was denser, the entries longer, the situations more complicated, the judgments more visible. Gus's handwriting had changed too, more settled, more confident, the handwriting of a man who had stopped second-guessing himself on most things. February 1974, brought in 2 young men for fighting outside Dawson's bar, Earl Hines and a man named Crocker from the county north. Earl is 22, works at the lumber yard, has a mother at home with a bad leg. Crocker started it. Earl finished it. Filed on Crocker, released Earl with a warning. Earl's mother called the next morning to say thank you. I told her he handled himself fine and she should be proud. That's not in any official record, but it seemed worth saying. October 1977. Found a woman sleeping in the lot behind the building. She had 2 bags and a black eye. I brought her inside, put her in the warden's room, which is warmer, made coffee. She didn't want to say who hit her. I didn't push. In the morning, I drove her to her sister's house in Carlisle, 30 miles. I filed nothing. There was nothing to file. There was just a woman who needed a night somewhere safe and a ride in the morning. She was halfway through the second volume when she found it. The entry dated August 1978. She read it once, then again, and then a third time, not because the words were unclear, but because the meaning of them was settling into something she needed to receive slowly. August 1978. Carol Voss, 22, disorderly. No bail requested. Brought in around midnight. She'd been at the bar on Route 4 and got into it with someone outside. Nothing serious, nothing injured. She sobered up fast, sat in cell 2 and didn't say a word. In the morning she asked about her baby. She has a newborn at home. She'd left it with a neighbor, she said, and she was worried sick. I told her the neighbor had called me and everything was fine. That wasn't true. I went and checked myself before she woke up. Baby was fine. Neighbor was keeping it. I let Carol go without filing. There wasn't a charge worth making. She walked home 4 miles in the early morning. I watched her go. I wrote it down here because I wanted it written somewhere, even if not in the official book. She'll be all right, that one. She was embarrassed and scared, and she didn't ask for anything. Those are the people who need the most help and ask for it the least. Lena read the entry 3 times. Carol Voss. Her foster mother's name had been Carol Voss, the woman with the short hair and the wide face in the photograph in her jacket pocket, who had taken her in at 6 years old and called her Lena Bird and taught her to make biscuits from scratch, and died when Lena was 15, leaving behind a specific hole in the shape of a person that nothing had quite filled since. Lena was 20 years old. Carol had been 22 in 1978, a baby at home, left with a neighbor. She did the math very carefully. She counted the years. She had been born in 1978. She sat in the dark of the warden's room with the ledger open in her lap and the barred window showing a rectangle of evening sky going from blue to purple, and she did not move for a long time. She had been Carol Voss's baby. She had been the newborn at home, left with a neighbor, while Carol sobered up in the cell. And a man named Gus Pelham had driven by in the early morning to check on her before he let Carol go. He had written it down because he wanted it written somewhere, even if not in the official book. He had checked on her. He had not known her name then. He had never known what came after, that Carol would give up the baby for adoption that same year, that the baby would grow up in foster care, that Carol would find her again when she was 6 and keep her until she died. He had just checked on a baby on a Tuesday morning in 1978 because a young mother was worried sick and he thought she should know her baby was fine. Lena closed the ledger. She held it against her chest. Outside, the sourwood trees were shapes against the evening sky, and the first light of the first cold night was coming through the gaps in the building, and from somewhere down the lane a dog was barking at something that didn't answer. She sat there for a long time. She thought about Carol Voss walking 4 miles home in the early morning with no charge on her record, because a constable had decided some things didn't need to go in the book. Carol at 22, young and frightened, doing the hard arithmetic of a life that had gotten complicated, going home to a baby she hadn't been sure how to keep. She thought about what had happened to that baby, the adoption, the foster system, the years of temporary houses and careful packing, and the single placement that had felt like a home. She thought about Carol finding her again at 6 years old and what that must have taken. She thought about what Carol had been carrying all those years, the knowledge of what she'd left behind and then found again, the weight of a decision made in desperation that she had spent the rest of her life trying to answer for. Carol had never talked about the year before Lena came to her, about the early days. She had taken Lena in and loved her without condition and without explanation, and Lena had been 6 years old and had not known there was anything to explain. She opened the envelope. The handwriting inside was different from the ledger, older, slower, the deliberate hand of a man whose joints had made writing difficult toward the end. To whoever this finds, my name is August Pelham. I was the constable and warden in Carvel for 31 years. I retired in 1994, and I have been trying to figure out what to do with this building ever since. It is mine now. The county deeded it to me when they consolidated the department, which surprised me, but that's what they did. I am leaving it to whoever needs it most. I set up the deed transfer with the county to go through the tax auction, so it would go to someone who was looking for something nobody else wanted. That's usually who needs a place the most. The ledger is the record of what I actually did in 31 years, as opposed to what the official record shows. I kept a parallel account because I believed the real account mattered. Some of those people in there, I didn't file on them when I should have, and I'd do it again. Some of them I helped with money I never got back, and I'd do that again too. I'm not asking for credit. I'm leaving the record because records matter even when nobody sees them. The document box has the deed to this property, the title, and a passbook for an account at the Carvel Savings Bank. The passbook has $22,400 in it. That is 31 years of bail money I put up for people who couldn't pay. Most of it wasn't repaid. The money that was repaid went back into the account. I never touched it for anything else. I want it to go to whoever holds this building, for the repairs it needs, or for whatever it becomes. Use it for something the town needs. The back lot is registered with the Tennessee Historic Preservation Office as the site of the original 1880s Carvel Town Hall Foundation. There is a trust deed in the document box that protects that designation and ties it to the Jailhouse property. Someone will come for it eventually. There is a heritage foundation that has been writing me letters for years. Let them have access to the foundation site. Don't let them take the lot. I don't know who will find this. I hope it finds someone who needs a building and knows what a building is for. August G. Pelham, Carvel Constable, Rhett. Lena folded the letter. She sat in the dark room with Gus Pelham's ledger and his letter and his tin cup and his photograph. She sat for a long while. The building was quiet around her, the stone walls giving off their old cold, and through the barred window the sky had gone fully dark and the first stars were visible over the ridge. She thought about a man driving by in the morning just to make sure. She was going to stay. The notice from the county assessor's office arrived 3 weeks after Lena moved in. She had been sleeping on the floor of the warden's room in her sleeping bag, which was warmer than the car and sturdier than the alternatives. She had found the passbook in the document box, $22,400, exactly as the letter said, last transaction dated 6 years ago. And she had opened a checking account at the Carvel Savings Bank and transferred a portion for repairs. She had bought a used cot from the hardware store and a propane camp stove and 2 gallons of white paint. She had been working the building in the mornings and reading the ledger in the evenings and slowly understanding the shape of a life that had been lived in this room. She had not yet repaired the roof. That was what the notice was about. A county building inspector had made a routine assessment of the parcel following the tax auction and determined that the flat roof presented an imminent structural hazard. The notice cited 3 specific code sections and gave a 10-day deadline to either remediate the hazard or face reclassification as an emergency condemnation, which would void the deed transfer pending county review. Lena read the notice twice. 10 days. She looked at the roof. The buckled corner had gotten worse in a rain 2 nights ago. She put a bucket under it and lay in her sleeping bag listening to the drip. The inspector wasn't wrong. The corner section needed to come off and be relayed, and the rest of the flat roof needed a new membrane, and none of that was work she could do alone in 10 days. She went to the hardware store. Mabel Crisp had been running the dry goods counter at Crisp Hardware for 40 years, since her husband Earl had gone to work at the county garage and left her the store. She was 71 short, with the direct, unhurried manner of a woman who had been answering questions across a hardware counter since before most of her customers were born. She had a gray braid and reading glasses on a chain, and a standing offer of coffee from the pot at the back of the store that she extended to everyone and meant. She looked up when Lena came in. She looked at Lena steadily for a moment, the measured, unperforming assessment of someone deciding whether they're looking at a problem or a person. "You're the one who bought the Pelham building," she said. "Yes, ma'am. I left you that note." "I found it, thank you." Mabel came around the counter. She studied Lena the way she studied lumber samples, looking for what was actually there, not what she expected. "How old are you?" 20. "How'd you end up in Carvel?" "Gas stop. I saw the auction notice." Mabel said nothing for a moment. She poured coffee without asking and set it on the counter. "I knew Gus Pelham for 40 years, she said. "He ran that building for 31 of them. When he died, I went in and left that note because I knew eventually someone would buy it and I wanted them to know about the key." She paused. "I didn't know if anyone would come." "He left a letter," Lena said, "and a ledger." Mabel went very still. "He wrote it all down. 31 years, 3 volumes. Mabel set her coffee down slowly. She looked at the window for a moment. When she looked back, her eyes were wet, but only briefly. She did not permit extended sentiment. Lena would understand later, but allowed herself brief and honest moments of it. "He told me once that the real record was the one that nobody would ever use against anybody. He said a man's ledger should show what he actually did, not just what he filed." She looked at Lena. "I didn't know he'd actually kept one." "He did. I've been reading it." "What's in it?" Lena looked at the coffee cup in her hands. 31 years of deciding what justice actually looked like," she said, "in a town this size." Mabel was quiet for a long time. Then, "What do you need?" "I have a 10-day notice on the roof. I need someone who can do flat roof work fast, and I can pay for the materials but not a full labor rate." Mabel didn't blink. "My nephew Cord does roofing. He owes me a favor from 2019 that he has been trying to repay for 5 years. She reached for the phone behind the counter. "I'll call him today." Cord Crisp arrived the next morning with his truck and 2 of his crew and spent 3 days on the jailhouse roof, pulling the failed corner section, relaying the limestone cap, applying a new membrane over the flat portion. He charged Lena for materials and a fraction of his usual labor, which she paid without argument because Mabel had clearly had a conversation with him that she was not party to. While Cord worked overhead, people started coming by. An older man named Prentice, who had been the town's mail carrier for 20 years before he retired, came to look at the building and stayed to help Lena clear the overgrown lot at the back. He worked without explanation for 3 hours and then said, "Gus fixed my truck twice when I couldn't afford the garage. Just fixed it. Left it in my driveway." He went home and came back the next morning. A woman named D. Ann brought a casserole and stood in the front doorway looking at the 2 open cell doors and the barred windows, and said that her brother had spent a night in cell 1 in 1971 for something that might have gotten him a record if Gus hadn't handled it the way he handled things. She didn't say what it was. She set the casserole on the desk and left. A retired teacher named Marcus came and walked the whole building slowly, room by room, and said he had been trying to find out what happened to the Pelham building since Gus died and was glad it had found the right person. He asked if Lena needed anything. She said she needed to know who the Heritage Foundation people were, the ones who had written Gus about the back lot. Marcus said he knew and would make a call. By the time Cord finished the roof and the inspector signed off on the building, the front step of the jailhouse had become a kind of station, the way those things happen in small towns when word moves and people have been waiting for a reason to show up. Coffee appeared. Tools appeared. Someone replaced the rotted board on the front step without asking first. Someone else mortared the crack in the east wall that had been weeping water since before Lena arrived. Mabel came every Tuesday with food and information, in roughly equal measure. She told Lena about Gus in the way of someone who had been holding a story for a long time and was glad to have someone to tell it to. He never married, Mabel said. He said a constable's job was like being a doctor in a small town. You knew too much about everybody. He said that made certain kinds of intimacy complicated. She poured coffee. But he knew everybody. He knew which families were struggling and which ones were just proud about it. And he knew the difference between someone who needed a warning and someone who needed a hand, and he never mixed them up. She looked at the barred window. He told me once that the hardest part of the job wasn't the arrests. It was the people he couldn't help the official way. He said the system had rules and the rules were right most of the time, but most of the time wasn't all of the time, and in that gap was the whole job. Kept a second ledger, Lena said. For the gap. Mabel looked at her. Yes, she said quietly. That sounds like him. She came the following Tuesday with coffee and a woman she introduced as Dee Ann's mother, a woman in her 80s named Patsy, who had lived on Prater Lane all her life and who sat in the constable's chair for the first time since 1969, when she had come to report a stolen bicycle, and looked around the room as if she were measuring the distance between then and now. He found the bicycle, Patsy said, walked it back to my house, never filed anything, never made a fuss. She looked at the pegboard. He told me the boy who took it had a hard situation at home and he'd already handled it. She was quiet. I always wondered what handled it meant. It's in the ledger, Lena said. Patsy looked at her. He wrote down what he did, Lena said. For 31 years, everything he handled. Patsy was quiet for a long time. Then she said, he was the only policeman I ever knew who made me feel safer, not more afraid when I saw him coming. She set her coffee on the desk. That's rarer than it sounds. The roof was done by day 8. The inspector cleared the building on day 9. Lena stood in the front room after the inspector left and looked at the ceiling, solid now, clean, the buckled corner relayed, and the new membrane over the flat portion tight and sound. She had watched cord work and helped where she could, and had learned enough about flat roof construction in 3 days that she could have done the next repair herself if she needed to. She thought the inspector had been expecting her to be gone by the time he came back for the reinspection. She had not been gone. Keep going. What Lena found in that warden's room is the reason Gus Pelham spent 31 years in a building nobody else wanted. Stay with her. That evening, Lena sat in the warden's room with the ledger and a lamp she'd bought at the hardware store, and the first fire of the season in the wood stove, which Cord had cleaned the flue on as an afterthought, and she finished reading the 3rd volume. The last entry was dated 1993, the year before Gus retired. 31 years. The mayor tells me the county is consolidating and Carvel won't have its own constable anymore. I'm 62 and my knees have been bad since the winter of 1988. It's time. I have been trying to count up what the job was. Not the official account that's in the file cabinets at the county seat. The real account. And the real account is, I helped some people. I didn't help everyone I should have. I made some calls that were mine to make and not mine to make, and mostly I think I made them right, and the ones I didn't make right I have carried and I will keep carrying them. This building will be deeded to me when the county consolidates. I don't know what to do with that yet. I'll figure it out. I want to leave a record of what this place actually was. Not a monument to myself, just a record. The town deserves to know what was done here and done quietly for its sake. That's what the ledger is for. A. Pelham. Lena closed the ledger. She set it on the table beside the tin cup and Gus Pelham's photograph. She picked up the photograph. He had a kind face. The practiced kind. She thought about what he had done on a Tuesday morning in August 1978 on his own time, before his shift properly started, driven by a neighbor's house to check on a baby he didn't know, so that the baby's mother could leave the jailhouse knowing everything was all right. He hadn't filed. He hadn't looked for credit. He hadn't known what came after the adoption, the foster care, the woman who would take the baby in at 6 years old and love her until she died. He had just driven by. And Lena had ended up here. She did not think this was a coincidence exactly. She thought it was the kind of thing that happened when people did quiet, careful work without knowing what it would become. The way everything connected, eventually, to everything else. The way a 31-year ledger in a building nobody wanted could end up in the hands of the person who needed it most. She set the photograph back beside the tin cup. She was going to stay. The building was repaired enough to live in and enough to be proud of. The roof held. The wood stove drew clean. The flagstone floor was level throughout and the east wall crack was mortared solid, and the front step was new pine that Cord had planed smooth before he set it. The two cells still had their barred doors on their hinges, and the constable's desk was still bolted to the wall, and the pegboard still had its hooks, and the warden's room was warm in the evenings with the stove going. She had painted the interior walls white, one coat, which brightened the room enough that you could read without squinting. She had cleaned the barred windows until they let in the full late October light. She had repaired the door latches on both cell doors so they swung freely and latched firmly, which felt important even though the cells were empty. She was thinking about what they might become. Not cells, something else. Keep going. What Lena found in that warden's room is the reason Gus Pelham spent 31 years in a building nobody else wanted. Stay with her. The letter from Harlan Cross arrived on a Friday morning, slid under the jailhouse door before Lena was awake. She found it when she got up, a white envelope on the flagstone floor, and opened it at the desk. The letter was from an attorney named Briggs, representing Cross Property Holdings, LLC. It was polite in the practiced way of letters that contain threats, all the courtesy on the surface and the pressure underneath, like something sealed under pressure that will release when opened. The letter stated that Mr. Cross, through counsel, had identified a procedural irregularity in the Carville County tax auction regarding Parcel 9-2B. The irregularity, the letter explained, was this. The Pelham Jailhouse property had been conveyed to August Pelham personally by the county in 1994, but the property had never been properly removed from the county's asset registry before being placed on the tax lien list. This meant the county had effectively auctioned property it still technically owned, without proper authority. Attorney Briggs's client was prepared to petition the county commission to void the auction on procedural grounds and reinstate the county's ownership, after which Mr. Cross would make a fair market offer for the parcel. There was a second page, a color rendering of a cell tower, approximately 150 feet tall, shown placed in the back lot of the jailhouse property. The caption read, Tri-County Wireless Coverage Solution, Proposed Carville Installation. Lena set the rendering on the desk. She had known something like this was coming. Mabel had warned her, obliquely, that there were interests in the development of that lot, that Gus had received approaches about the back lot while he was alive and had declined them. She hadn't known the approach would come this fast or this formally. She looked at the letter again. The legal theory was thin, a procedural error in the transfer of a small county property 29 years ago, but thin theories became real problems if you couldn't afford to contest them. She had the passbook money, but legal fees could consume it fast. She needed an attorney. She said this to Mabel on Tuesday. Mabel drank her coffee and looked at the ceiling in the way of someone running through a mental address book. There's a woman in the county seat, she said. Property and land use law. She came to see me last spring about the back lot. She set her mug down. Her name is Ruth Jeffries. Her grandfather is Harmon Jeffries, the one who had the fence dispute with his neighbor in 1965. Lena thought about the ledger entry. Harmon Jeffries got into it with his neighbor over a fence line again. Went out and helped them move the fence to where the original survey said it was. Filed nothing. Problem solved. She knows about Gus, Lena asked. Her grandfather told her the story when she went to law school. He said Gus Pelham was the reason he still had a neighbor he could stand to wave at. Mabel refilled the coffee. Call her. She has a standing interest in this property. Ruth Jeffries was 35 and direct in the way of someone who had no patience for being underestimated. She drove to Carville the following day, walked the property in her boots, read the auction documents and the cross letter and the trust deed from the document box, and gave her assessment in the kitchen of the warden's room over Lena's camp stove coffee. The procedural argument is weak, she said. The county's 1994 deed transfer to Pelham is on record. The fact that the county's asset registry wasn't updated is an administrative error, not a legal flaw in the transfer. The property was Pelham's. His estate deeded it back into the tax lien process after his death. The auction was valid. Can Cross push it to a hearing? He can file. Filing is cheap and hearings are expensive, which is the point. She set the document down. But there's something else. She opened the trust deed. This Historic Preservation Trust registered with the Tennessee Historic Preservation Office in 2001. It specifies that the back lot, including the Town Hall Foundation, is held in perpetuity as a preservation easement appurtenant to the Jailhouse property. It prohibits any commercial development on the lot, including telecommunications infrastructure. She looked up. Gus registered this trust 17 years before his death and recorded it with both the county and the state. Cross's attorney either missed it or is hoping you missed it. Which? Given the quality of the Cross letter, I suspect missed it. She folded the trust deed back into the document box. The cell tower can't be built on that lot, full stop. His entire basis for wanting the property disappears. Lena sat back. So he has no real case. He has a filing. Whether he has a case depends on whether his attorney reads the trust deed before the hearing. Ruth looked at her. I'll write a response letter that includes the trust deed as an exhibit. That should end it. She paused. If it doesn't, I'll go to the hearing. What do you charge? Ruth was quiet for a moment. She looked at the tin cup on the table, at the ledger, at the photograph of Gus in his uniform. My grandfather farmed that land on the county road for 50 years, she said. Your building in the back lot is part of why. He told me that story every Thanksgiving until the year he died. She closed her briefcase. Send me the documents. We'll figure out the fee later. She left and drove back to the county seat. Lena stood in the doorway of the warden's room for a while after Ruth's car disappeared. She was thinking about a fence line in 1965, about a constable with a level and 2 hours on his day off, and the patience to find the survey marker and move the fence to where the original document said it belonged. He had filed nothing. He had charged nothing. He had just shown up because 2 neighbors needed the fence to be in the right place, and he was the person who could make sure it was. And 60 years later, Harmon Jeffries' granddaughter was driving 40 minutes to help Lena keep a building that had nothing to do with her except that it was the right thing to do. She thought about Gus writing that entry. Filed nothing. Problem solved. His handwriting in the ledger, the same handwriting across 31 years, patient and plain. He had not known about Ruth Jeffries. He had not known about any of what would come after. He had just moved a fence. She thought about Carol Voss walking 4 miles home. She thought about a man driving by a neighbor's house on a Tuesday morning to check on a baby he didn't know. These were not large things. They were not dramatic things. They were the size of what one person could do on a given morning when they decided to pay attention to what was in front of them. And they were still reverberating, decades later, in a room on Prater Lane in Carvel, Tennessee, where a 20-year-old woman who had been sleeping in her car was trying to keep a building that had once been condemned. She went to find Remai. He was in the back lot, clearing the last of the overgrowth from the area around the historic foundation marker. A small stone post she'd found under 2 feet of pokeweed the week before, inscribed with the initials of the Tennessee Historic Preservation Office and a survey date from 1987. He was working with the same methodical patience he brought to everything, pulling the vines from the base of the post without tearing the roots, keeping the soil around the marker intact. He looked up when she came around the building. Ada's team can start in 2 weeks, Lena said. He looked at the marker, then at the cleared area around it. Needs to be level before they come, he said. I can do that. I know. She stood for a moment watching him work. I appreciate you being here. He didn't look up. He was pulling a vine root from the soil with careful, even tension. Where else would I go, he said. Not a question. She understood that. She had not had a where else for most of her life. Somewhere eventually, she said. When you're ready. He set the vine root aside and looked at the marker. Yeah, he said, but not yet. She went back inside. She made coffee. She sat at the constable's desk for a while in the afternoon quiet, looking at the pegboard and the two hooks, one still holding the skeleton key ring, and the cells with their barred doors standing open, and the door to the warden's room, and through that door the shelf where she'd put the ledger, visible in the afternoon light. The real account. The record no one would use against anybody. She was going to add to it. She was adding to it already. She had found him 3 days after she moved in, or he had found her. He was 17 and had been using the jailhouse to sleep in before Lena bought it, had apparently been coming in through the window of cell 2 for weeks, and had arrived one morning while Lena was cleaning to find the door padlocked, and a woman he didn't know mortaring the east wall crack from the outside. He had stood in the lot looking at her with the specific blank-faced wariness of someone who had been found somewhere he wasn't supposed to be and was calculating the fastest exit. "I'm not calling anyone," Lena had said. She had recognized the expression. She had worn it herself. He had stayed. Cautiously, then not cautiously. He was quick with his hands, good with tools in the self-taught way of someone who had figured things out by trial and error rather than instruction, and he worked without being asked to, which Lena took as the best possible sign of character. He was also, it turned out, in the ledger. October 2001. Ramai Doyle, 17, but that would have been a different Ramai Doyle. Gus had retired in 1994. She looked at the date again and then at Ramai working in the yard and felt a small internal shift, the kind you feel when something clicks into place. The Ramai in the ledger was 17 in 2001. Gus had been retired, but he had still made note of something, a post-retirement entry, in a different hand, more cramped. His handwriting had changed in old age. October 2001. Heard from Mabel that a boy named Tommy Doyle got into trouble at the school and the sheriff's department is looking at it harder than they should. Tommy's a good kid, I know his father. Went to see the deputy personally. Reminded him what hard charges do to a 17-year-old's record. The deputy agreed the situation didn't need to escalate. Tommy got a warning. I wrote it here because I'm not filing anywhere else. Tommy Doyle. Ramai's father, maybe, or an uncle. Family name in the ledger again, decades after the retirement. She looked at Ramai stacking the cleared brush along the lot's fence line, working steadily in the October sun. She didn't say anything about it yet. Some things you held until the right moment, but she kept it the way she kept everything that mattered. She found him by the fence. I need help with the cell block floor, she said. The flagstones near the drain channel need releveling. You want to learn how to do that or you want to watch. He looked at her. He had the same calculation she recognized from herself at his age, waiting to find out what the catch was. Learn, he said. All right, Lena said. Come on. The hearing was on a Wednesday morning in October in the county commission meeting room, not a courtroom, a meeting room which was appropriate because the matter was a procedural dispute, not a lawsuit. Ruth had been right that the trust deed would give Cross's attorney pause, and he had delayed twice, which Ruth said was usually a sign that someone was hoping the other side would give up. Lena had not given up. She had also not slept well the night before, which she acknowledged to herself without making it mean anything. She woke at 4 and lay in the warden's room listening to the building and the sounds that buildings make in the early morning, the small contractions and expansions of stone in cooling air, the creak sound coming through the barred window, and she thought about Gus lying in this same room on his narrow iron bed for 31 years, waking early in the same darkness, unlocking the same front door. She made coffee before it was light. She dressed carefully. She drove to the county seat in the same direction Gus had driven for 31 years of his life, on the same roads, under the same hills going red and orange in the October morning. The meeting room had folding chairs in rows and most of them were taken. Mabel was there in her good coat with the hardware store logo pin on the lapel. Prentice, the retired mail carrier, was there, straight-backed and patient. Deanne, the woman who had brought the casserole. Marcus, the retired teacher. Cord Crisp in his work clothes, which were his best clothes. The Heritage Foundation representative, a careful woman named Ada who had been writing letters to this property for 12 years and had driven 90 minutes to be in the room. Patsy, the woman whose bicycle Gus had returned in 1975, was in the second row with her hands folded and her chin up in the way of someone who has decided to be present and means it. And in the back corner, sitting very still with his hands clasped on his knees, was Ramai Doyle. He had not been asked to come. He had come on his own. Lena had not looked for them to come. She had told no one to be there. She had told Ruth the date and gone about her work, and the town had decided on its own that this was a thing worth showing up for. She thought about Gus's ledger, about all the things he'd done quietly, without announcement, and how the valley had held them in memory anyway, person to person, for decades. She thought this was probably how it worked. You kept the accounts honestly, and the accounts kept you. Harlan Cross sat at the petitioner's table with Attorney Briggs, who had the restless energy of someone who had read the trust deed and was now aware the ground was not what he'd been told it was. Cross himself was 60, prosperous-looking, with the careful assessor's expression of a man accustomed to identifying what things were worth. He had not anticipated the trust deed. He had not anticipated the room being full. He had not anticipated Gus Pelham's foresight, documented in 2001, sealing the lot 22 years before anyone came to challenge it. The county commission chair read the petition summary, the procedural claim regarding the asset registry error. Ruth stood and responded in 4 sentences. The 1994 deed transfer was on record. The asset registry error was administrative. Pelham's estate had properly transferred the property to the tax lien process. The auction was valid. She then presented the trust deed. The back lot containing the historic Town Hall Foundation is subject to a preservation easement registered with the Tennessee Historic Preservation Office and recorded with the Carville County Clerk in 2001, she said. The easement prohibits any commercial development on the lot, including telecommunications infrastructure. The petitioner's stated purpose for acquiring the property, a cell tower installation, is legally prohibited on the lot in question by a recorded instrument that predates the petition by 22 years. She set the document on the table. The procedural claim is without merit and the development purpose is barred by recorded easement. The petition should be dismissed. The commission chair looked at Briggs. Briggs shuffled his papers. He offered a response about the asset registry and the transfer timeline. The commission chair asked 2 questions. Briggs answered them in the careful way of someone answering questions he doesn't want asked. Cross said nothing. He was reading the trust deed that Ruth had passed him, reading it with the focused attention of a man encountering a document that is going to change the shape of his morning. The commission chair looked at the 3 commissioners. A brief, quiet exchange. "The petition is dismissed," she said. The 2001 preservation easement stands. The deed transfer from the tax auction is valid. Parcel 92B and the appurtenant lot remain the property of Lena Voss. She gavelled the meeting closed. In the folding chairs, Mabel exhaled the long, slow exhale of someone who has been holding something for weeks. Prentice nodded once. Ada wrote something in her notebook with a small, satisfied motion. Cord Crisp looked at the ceiling, a private settling of something. Patsy sat very straight and pressed her lips together in the manner of someone permitting themselves a quiet satisfaction. In the back corner, Ramai unclenched his hands. Lena sat still for a moment. Then she breathed. She was thinking about Gus Pelham standing in front of his building in his uniform in the old photograph, squinting into the sun with his hands at his sides. 31 years in a small room doing a job that mostly consisted of deciding what justice actually looked like in the gap between what the rules said and what people needed. Writing it down in a private ledger because he believed the real record mattered even if nobody ever saw it. He had seen it. She had seen it. She stood up, picked up her folder, and walked to the door. Outside, Ruth Jeffries fell into step beside her. "That's done," Ruth said. "Yes." They walked to the parking lot in the cool October air, the sourwood on the hillside above the town square going deep red in the morning sun. "What will you do with it?" Ruth asked. Lena thought about the 2 cells and the constable's desk and the pegboard and the tin cup on the warden's table and the ledger on the shelf and the Heritage Foundation and the Town Hall Foundation in the back lot and Ramai learning to level flagstones and Mabel with her coffee on Tuesdays. "I don't know all of it yet," she said. But I know the first part. Ruth looked at her. What's the first part? Keep the door open, Lena said. She was 21 when the jailhouse opened. Not to the public, not formally, there was nothing formal about it. She took down the condemned signs the county had posted and repainted the original signage, CARVELL Constable's Office. Beneath it, she added a line in the same lettered style, APLLHAM, Warden 1963-1994. LVOSS, 2024. Ramai had painted the lettering. He had a steady hand and a patience with detail work that Lena had recognized early and encouraged consistently. She had noticed it first when he relayed the flagstone in cell 2 without being asked, fitting each stone back with a precision that went beyond what the job required, as if he understood that the floor mattered and was treating it accordingly. She asked him where he'd learned to work like that. He said he hadn't learned it anywhere. She said that meant he'd been practicing it all his life without knowing it, which was the same as learning. He was 18 by the time the signage went up, had finished his GED through the county's program that spring. He talked about a vocational program in the fall, masonry and structural repair, which suited what Lena had seen of his hands. He lived in the first cell, which she had converted to a small room. A cot, a shelf, a window, the original bars still in the frame because they were original and she wasn't taking them out. He paid a nominal rent and worked the building in exchange, and the arrangement had the self-evident logic of two people who needed a building and a building that needed people. She had found out, eventually, about the ledger entry. Not Tommy Doyle, a different Doyle. She had looked more carefully at the post-retirement entries and found the name. Doyle, 2001. Tommy Doyle was Ramai's uncle. The entry said Gus had gone to see the sheriff's deputy personally on behalf of a 17-year-old with a hard situation at home. He had not filed. He had handled it. She didn't tell Ramai right away. She told him in November on a Tuesday with Mabel there and the stove going and the October rains on the roof. She sat him down at the constable's desk and opened the ledger to the page. He read it slowly. He read it a second time. He looked up. He didn't know me, he said. He knew your family, he knew what you came from. Ramai looked at the ledger for a long time. My uncle never said anything about it. I expect he didn't know how. Ramai was quiet. Then he picked up the ledger carefully with both hands, the way you pick up something that belongs to someone else and that you're being trusted with. He read the entry one more time, set it back on the table. Okay, he said, not a dismissal. The opposite of a dismissal, the word a person uses when something has landed and they need a moment before they can say more. The Heritage Foundation had begun work on the back lot in the spring. Ada came twice a week with her field team, and Lena kept coffee on for them. By June, they had uncovered the east and north corners of the original 1880s Town Hall foundation, 3 feet of coarse limestone, still plumb after 140 years, mortared with lime and sand, and the stubborn patience of people who built things to last. Ada documented everything with the focused care of someone who understood that the record was the preservation. The foundation would stay in the ground. The lot would stay protected. What mattered was that someone knew it was there, that the knowing was written down, that the record existed. Lena understood that better than most people her age. Mabel came every Tuesday and brought the town with her, one story at a time. The stories accumulated in the new ledger Lena kept on the shelf beside Gus's 3 volumes. Not formal documentation, no charges, no official record, nothing that would be used against anyone. Just the real account. The names of the people who came through and what they needed and what she could offer or find or connect them to. She helped Ramai prepare for his vocational program application. She helped an older man named Rufus, who had been in Gus's ledger in 1975, a trespassing charge that Gus had written off with the notation Mr. Rufus has nowhere to sleep. Not a crime. Drove him to the shelter in the county seat. She helped Rufus navigate the county's senior housing wait list, which had become unreasonably complicated, and which Lena worked through with the systematic, patient method of someone trained to find things in imperfect filing systems. She helped a young woman named Tess who came to the door in February, not knowing exactly why she had come, only that she had seen the light on, and the door looked like a place that might be open to whatever she needed to say. Lena made coffee. Tess sat at the constable's desk for a long time. She talked about a situation that wasn't simple and didn't have a simple answer. Lena listened. She did not file anything. She told Tess about resources that existed and made a call to a person who could help and wrote the name and number on a piece of paper that she handed across the desk. She did not write it in the ledger. Some things were between the person and the door stayed closed on them. Mabel read the entries Lena did write down, read them on Tuesdays over coffee. The new ledger opened between them and said once, looking at a particular entry from December, "You sound like him." "I'm trying to." "You don't have to try that hard," Mabel said. "It's already there." The relic trio stayed on the shelf. The tin cup, the pocket Bible with the cracked spine, the photograph in the plain wooden frame. She had not moved them and she was not going to move them. They were Gus's. They were the buildings. They belonged where they were. She locked up at night and slept in the warden's room, and in the mornings unlocked the front door the way Gus had unlocked it every morning for 31 years. Early, before anyone needed anything, so the building would be open when they did. Mabel read the Carol Voss entry on a Tuesday in November, when Lena showed it to her over coffee. She read it twice. She set the new ledger down on the desk and was quiet for a long time. "He'd have been glad it was you," she said finally. "He didn't know it would be me." "I know." She looked at the old ledger on the shelf, visible through the glass pane. "But he trusted the building to find the right person, and it did." The building had 2 cells and a constable's desk and a pegboard and 31 years of quiet work preserved in 3 volumes, and a new ledger open on the table and a tin cup and a Bible and a photograph of a broad-shouldered man squinting into the sun, his hands at his sides, his face doing its best. Justice isn't always what gets written in the book. Sometimes it's what a good person decides not to write. August Pelham had known that. He had spent 31 years in a building nobody else wanted, keeping 2 accounts, the official one and the real one, and leaving the real one sealed in a wardrobe for whoever came next. Lena kept both now. She was 21 years old. She had a building. She had the real account to keep. She was just getting started. EOF.